My name is Emily Nakashima. Thanks. I manage the engineering team at a small startup called Honeycomb.io. I should say that I have been doing technical speaking for a very long time on the topics of performance monitoring and observability, but this is my very first management or culture talk, and so I'm really, really excited about it, but I'm also a little nervous, so please wish me luck. Thank you. You guys are too nice. You all are too nice. So just a little bit of background, what is Honeycomb? We make an observability tool that helps engineers understand and debug their production systems. You send us data in the form of events, and then we do wonderful things with that data, like graph it as time series. We can show you traces. We also can show you the raw data again. And I think the only thing you kind of need to know here is that this is a very technical product, but also that there's a lot of user experience on top of this kind of technical product. I could talk about this for hours, and if you find me after this, I probably will. I'm sorry in advance. But today, what I really want to talk to you about is something that's just as important to me, which is hiring. And of course, we all know that hiring is broken. Nobody likes it, and worst of all, I think most of us have hiring processes that don't actually tell us all the things that we wish they told us. Interviews are rarely predictive of success on the job. There are so many blog posts and books out there about how Google and Facebook and Microsoft hire, but there's not a lot of evidence that these carefully crafted hiring processes work better than an average one. Google in particular is famous for putting a lot of thought into their hiring process, especially for engineers, and they are also famous for being willing to kind of fearlessly examine that process with data, which I love so much. And they found that the process they had, this was back in 2012, who knows if it's changed, but they found that the process that they had was not actually very predictive of success on the job. There's this wonderful quote, sorry if you're in the back, I'll read it, I promise. There's this wonderful quote from Laszlo Bock, who was then the SVP of People Operations at Google. This is what he said about their hiring process. We looked at thousands of interviews and everyone who had done the interviews and what they scored the candidate and how that person ultimately performed in their job. We found zero relationship. It's a complete random mess, except for one guy who was highly predictive because he only interviewed people in a very specialized area where he happened to be the world's leading expert. One person at Google can do this well. So, of course, this doesn't mean that their interview process is totally useless, right? It probably does weed out people who are incompetent or people who lack relevant skills. It might even weed out people who are terrible to work with in one way or another. That's good. But even this Google process is not great at telling who has the relevant skills but will fail on the job for some other reason, and who will be an extraordinary performer in this role versus an average one. And interestingly enough, I actually saw a Harvard Business Review article that said that most people, more than half of all hires are unsuccessful in one way or another, which is kind of grim when you think about that as a number. So that's the starting point that we have in front of us. That doesn't feel especially good when you think about the fact that Google is going to spend hours interviewing a lot of these candidates. They're going to reject a very high percentage of candidates because they're very selective. So they're spending a lot of time on people, even people they won't hire. And they have no way to know how many of those are false negatives, of course. The problem of false negatives, the great candidate that you failed to offer the role to, is a problem that's really hard to look at with data, but I think, if we sort of think through our networks, all of us kind of anecdotally know some people who would have been so great in a role and didn't get it because of these processes. And of course, us as a small startup, we're not Google. We don't have nearly half of the resources that they do to apply to this problem. So that's pretty daunting. Do we even stand a chance? And then, of course, you think about this the other way. We don't even like doing this, right? It would be okay, maybe, if the interview process was at least fun and entertaining and we had a great time. But it's not. Most people dread the interviews at these big companies. Candidates may spend months preparing, looking at their old college algorithms and data structures textbooks, and they often find that they rarely use these skills on the job. The interview process is filled with small indignities, wastes of time, and information black holes. And it's not like anyone on the hiring side is even having fun. When was the last time you talked to a manager and they said, I'm doing my favorite thing today, phone screenings? I have certainly never said that myself. So hiring is broken. If we accept that as our premise, what can we do? At Honeycomb, we've committed to at least trying to fail in new and exciting ways. And it turns out we can. Spoiler. These are the goals when we were sort of thinking about what those ways might be. One, we don't want to spend that much time. We're a startup, every minute counts. We have, like, any time that 2 of my engineers spend an hour in a room with a candidate, that's time that they could have spent like writing a feature, fixing a bug. I really jealously guard their time because I run the engineering team, and it's important. We don't have a big recruiting team or a hiring budget. We don't work with external recruiters. We're lucky in that way. Our HR team is like a fractional percentage of one person at the company, so she's great, but I don't get a ton of support there. So the hiring team is mostly just me, and I don't want to spend the budget to expand it. And finally, can we make this process less soul-sucking and awful, like I talked about? Can we make it less harmful to candidates? Can I just get a show of hands? Who in this room has been through an interview process that they felt made them doubt themselves or felt otherwise somehow kind of harmful to them? Yeah, I've definitely been through a couple myself. So stretch goal, can we make this process friendlier to candidates? Is there a world in which we could have it have positive returns for them even if we don't hire them? And finally, can we make a process that's more predictive, that tells us more about how people will actually do on the job? So in other words, can we do the impossible and make our process faster, cheaper, and better? Maybe. So the disclaimer here is that I'm going to talk about hiring engineers at a small company. I know that not all these things will graft directly onto whatever hiring process you're thinking about, but I hope it's at least some interesting food for thought. I also want to make sure I give credit where it's due here. A lot of what I'm talking about comes from Charity Majors, who is my CEO and one of the founders of Honeycomb. Charity and I are very different people. Charity likes whiskey, rainbows, databases, and testing and production. Yes. Me, on the other hand, I like checklists. I like safety first. I'm into JavaScript and front-end development, and I really am into disaster preparedness as like a fun hobby. Yep. All right. So the philosophy and ideas I'm going to talk about today come from Charity. Charity is the person who made me believe it was possible to do hiring differently. I am the person who figures out how the rubber meets the road, which is to say, if Charity were giving this talk, it would probably be called something like how to use your great management instincts, your broad network, your abundant generosity, and the fact that you only sleep 3 to 4 hours a night to hire an extraordinary team quickly for not that much money using a process that's probably not repeatable by anyone everywhere ever again. So it would actually have a better title because Charity gives great talks, but you get the gist. Instead, you have me, Little Miss Tactical. So I'm going to give you Startup Hiring Fast, Cheap, and Good. The subtitle that you can put below that if you want to is how people who are not charity majors can mostly hire like charity majors without undertaking the long and arduous process of actually trying to become charity majors. I want to tell you what we're trying out. I want to tell you the things we're trying to do. And I think that hopefully we can all come out of this with processes that are faster, cheaper, less harmful, and a little more predictive. So this is the part where we get to the nitty-gritty details of what we actually do, and then you'll find that it's quite boring. We have a relatively short and standard process. People submit an application on our website. I do a phone screening with candidates. It's not a technical phone screening. It's really just to make sure we're on the same page about what this company is. It turns out there's a lot of companies named Honeycomb. What the role is, what it'll be like to work with us, just to make sure that we're both kind of like seeing the same big picture. This is the point where I also explain each step of our interview process. I want people to know what they're getting into. After that, we have the option of letting people come in and meet the team. The thing we actually suggest is to come in and sit in on a meeting if you can. So the best thing is typically to come to our all-hands meeting or to come to one of our all-engineering meetings. And we think that we really want to be respectful of candidates' time, so it's really nice to give them a chance to get to know us. We don't want to ask for their time before they've had a chance to use some of our time and kind of get to know us and see what we're about. And we think that part of setting people up for success is being transparent about what to expect and kind of seeing us in our natural habitat so they can make sure that they're interested before they do the whole process. After that, there is a code exercise. It's 2 hours of actually doing the exercise at home, and then we'll jump on a Google Hangout and debrief for like half an hour afterward. And then finally, there's like a half-day on-site interview. And the whole process end to end should really take about 1 working day of your time, hopefully nothing more than that. By the way, for remote candidates, that meet and greet step, we will just sort of set up times for them to chat with folks around the company on like a video chat. It's not quite as good as being able to come into the office, but it gives people a little bit of the same experience without flying out. And we have a very specific hiring philosophy that kind of underpins all of this, which is that we want to hire people for their strengths and not their lack of weaknesses. a lot of people would read this and say, oh, of course we do that. Of course that's how we think about hiring. But when you think about what our processes actually are, a lot of us have processes that are not designed to do that. Most hiring processes are very focused on eliminating unqualified people from the pipeline. We don't focus on giving people a chance to show us how they're extraordinary. We give them a chance to mess up and show us that they're not qualified. If you really think about so many interview processes, this is the most important thing they do. They don't give us a chance to show, we don't give people a chance to show them they're extraordinary. We give them a chance to mess up. That doesn't sound very fun. I don't want to do that. So that's a particular thing that's important to us to do differently. We do test for a handful of basic competencies that we know that people will just need to be successful. So there are certain kind of basic engineering skills that we know that people should have. But beyond that, our interview process has a lot of open-ended space where people choose what to show us to give them a chance to show the special places where they shine. And we don't want to push them toward the pits that they might fall into. Maybe the best place to see this is in our take-home code exercise. A lot of other code exercises that companies give out can kind of be graded on a strict rubric, and they're filled with kind of tricks and traps. And our code exercise is a little bit different. It's 2 hours. We ask them to do a short list of things. The first thing they do is set up the app. If in that process they find that something is confusing, we ask them to make some edits to the README or make some notes about it. We ask them to implement 1, 2, or 3 small features or bug fixes of their choosing after that. And this step is pretty interesting because some of these features, there's just sort of a short one-line description, so they're a little bit open-ended. We are small enough that we need every engineer to come in and have a decent product sense and kind of be thoughtful about what goes into a good user experience, and this is a really nice place to be able to see that. We kind of look at the choices they make, the design of those features, and we kind of understand how they think about the product through that. We know that they're not going to make perfect features in a short time period, but we also know that people who are going to put together a solution that is technically very elegant but awful to work with and not notice that are probably not going to be a good fit for what we need. Third, we ask them to leave a little bit of time to try to refactor this app and make it slightly better. Sometimes they run out of time, and so we ask them to just kind of take down some notes about what they would change. And this tends to give us a good sense for their technical taste and kind of their judgment and priorities. And finally, the debrief at the very end. We ask them 5 questions about how they'd maintain the app, how they would make it easier for their team to work with, how they would make it fast, how they would test it, and how do they make sure it works in production. This is a good chance to kind of see how experienced candidates are, because people who are more senior will tend to have much more sophisticated answers there. But a fun thing about this is that people actually surprise you all the time in a positive way by saying things that you wouldn't even have thought of. Unless you think you have to assemble some very intricate, beautiful code exercise to do this, to test all of these things, you really don't. Like the example app that we give people is such an embarrassment. It's hideous. I put it together in a weekend. This is the UI. It's like actively bad. Like, why are there 3 buttons? What do they even do? You can upload 1 photo, like the whole app, just one. You can't load just 1 photo, and you can add a caption to it, and that's it. And the code is, in fact, even worse than that. I know you can't see this in the back, but that's like jQuery and React mixed together. Yeah. It doesn't even have tests, which it actually really should. But the nice thing about this is it kind of gives candidates a lot of space to go in different directions to try and make things better and show us a little more about how they think. So we think that you make a good team by stitching together people who are complementary with these extraordinary skills and kind of fitting them in with people who have complementary skills that can kind of hold them up where they're weak and then share their skills where they're strong. Not by verifying that everyone on the team has sort of cleared the same basic bar. And when you think about it, like, which of those teams would you actually rather work on? I would much rather be on the team where there are people who are amazing at some things and need a little help in others, versus on a team where everyone has the same, like, 9 basic competencies that they've checked off. Another thing that's really important to us and that we found is really helpful is we use the phrase test in production, but I think the takeaway here is to try to make your interview process as close as possible to what people would actually do on the job. We don't want to understand how well candidates interview. We want to understand what it's going to be like to work with them. And this means that, if you can make the interview kind of more of a job simulation, it's probably going to tell you a lot more. So the code exercise isn't write something new. It tests working with legacy code. This is what we as engineers do all the time at any company that's older than 6 months. Honeycomb is 2 years old. Every day we dive into other people's code. Not all of it has tests. We want to make sure that candidates are comfortable doing that. The skills on the exercise are not just working with legacy code, too. The other 2 things that we really care about there are communication skills and product decision making, because those are the skills that Honeycomb engineers actually use every day. Um, One other thing to note here is we offer a contract to hire option for anyone who really wants to make sure that they understand what they're getting into. So that's actually a good way to try working together too. There are folks who hate interviewing so much that they're like, if I can do less interviewing, but I will take less stability, I'll do that. So for folks who are in that bucket, we say, okay, just kind of go through the first couple of conversations with us, and then we'll try you out for a contract, and then at the end we can decide mutually if it's a fit. Of course, our on-site interview also doesn't have any like logic puzzles or algorithms, unless we were going to hire someone into a role that required them to solve logic puzzles all day. When we do that, we'll use logic puzzles in our interview. The kind of biggest technical piece of our on-site interview is one where we pretend that we're in the early stages of building a technical product feature, and we ask you to work with us on helping to design it, just as you would do if you're on the team. So it's actually this little notifications widget that tells users about new features and problems with their data, and it has that kind of same open-ended quality that we talked about. Backend developers will often approach it by telling us, these are the database tables I want, or these are the API endpoints that I want. Front-end developers will often start talking about the UI and the behavior, and we're totally fine with either one of those. We find that good engineers will come up with a working implementation by the end. Senior engineers will often tell us where it's going to break and how we should scale it. But we find that the very best engineers, regardless of level, tend to spot the product and UX problems as they're kind of designing the feature and talk to us about what the trade-offs are. Kind of buried in all of this, you can see how important it is to us to set candidates up for success. A lot of interview processes really take this adversarial stance. People are kind of like, oh, unqualified candidates are trying to get into our company. We have to find them and knock them out of the pipeline. I think of that as a Space Invaders style interview process. If you take one thing away from this, no Space Invaders. We don't believe in that. So set candidates up for success. If I'm a hiring manager, when I hire someone onto my team, I'm not going to try and make them fail. So, why would I do that in the interview process? I don't care if they do well in an adversarial process because I'm going to make damn sure that that's not what my team is like. So I want to know what they do with a supportive process that is invested in their success. 2, we just straight up ask people how to interview them. We ask a couple of non-standard questions on our application, partly to sort of filter out candidates who are just like spraying out applications to everyone. But these 2 questions are kind of fun and interesting. The first one is, what is your favorite developer tool? Tell us why and what you do to improve it. It's kind of a softball. It sort of just gets people talking. But I think it's also really nice for understanding people's product sense and how they think about the products. But the second question is the very best one, which is, how do you show your best work? Our goal when interviewing is to see you at your strongest and best, not prove your weaknesses. So how should we interview you? Share one question or technique we should include to help you show, or it's not well worded, that we could include to help show you at your very best. We can't always do exactly what candidates write in this box, but at least it gives them a chance to tell us how they work best, and it helps us kind of know how to prep them and know where to expect them to shine and where to expect that they might need a little more support. 3, no surprises. We literally just tell them what we're looking for. In the code exercise, I tell people the most important things are technical communication, product sense, and your ideas about maintainability. The night before the on-site interview, we tell them who they're meeting with and what they're going to talk about. The day of the interview, they talk to me first before anyone else, and I give them some tips. And the most important tip I give them is, the thing we're looking for most in all these parts of the interview is communication. So if you ever get stuck, just talk us through your thought process, and that'll probably be fine. And you're probably seeing the theme here. Communication is the thread that runs through our whole interview process. From the code exercise to the technical design exercise, over and over, what we're really testing is communication skills. There's no step of our interview process where good communication is not either the thing we're testing itself or a very large force multiplier. And why is that? Of course, it's because it's the thing that we have found that's most correlated to success on the job. We expect that good engineers can always learn on the job, and we find that this is actually the thing that's hardest to teach. We also owe good communication back to the candidate. We try to be as transparent as possible about what our constraints are as a company. If people ask me salary bands, I will always tell them that up front. We always tell them how many other people are in the pipeline, how likely we think that it's going to be that the decision is going to go in their favor if they want to know that. And one of the hardest things that we can do, but we try to do anyway, is to give people feedback. If we decline someone after the phone screening, we always try to tell, any point in the process after the phone screening, we always try to tell them why to the degree that we can. And some people will actually dig and ask for more feedback, and we will do that in excruciating detail. You would think people might hate this, but a lot of people find that constructive feedback is so rare in their life that they're really grateful for it. We've had candidates even say, even though I didn't get the job and I'm disappointed, it was valuable to me to get this feedback, and I'm glad I went through the process. And finally, we want to make sure that candidates feel like they have just as much of a chance to interview us as we do them. So we talked about that optional meet and greet, but really the whole interview process should be just as much about getting to know us and getting to know the company as it is about learning about the candidate. Every interview slot leaves at least 5 minutes for the candidate to ask us questions, but some of the slots are more like 50-50, like we have one where you talk about design, one where you talk about the product, and those are fairly open-ended, and the candidate tends to talk or ask us just as much as we ask them. And of course, you don't just meet our engineers, you meet our founders, designers, product managers, because we know that to be successful, you're going to have to work cross-functionally. Of course, the technical design exercise, a part of that that's kind of fun is that we usually feel like we are part of your team during that. So we're sort of walking through the same problems together, and I think it's actually just as good of a simulation for the candidate to understand what it would be like to work with us as it is for us to understand what it would be like to work with them. So we really want candidates to know exactly what they're getting if they choose to join the team. And I think kind of looking back at this process, one of the things about it that I liked the most was that if you looked at our written values, we found that the process actually matched up to these pretty well. I think we show through the interview process what we value. Our values are, we hire adults, which kind of means that we are a high trust and high autonomy culture. Everything is an experiment, so like I said, we're always trying to fail in new and exciting ways. Feedback is a gift. We try to give feedback early and often, gently, but often. And we think that fast and close to right is better than perfect. So you can definitely see this in our interview process. You could also see it in the product. The final one is do it with style, which I am terrible at, but Charity's very good at it, so trust me. There's actually a blog post about this if you want to read more about them. And we've had candidates come to us and say, we applied because of this blog post. I would never believe a company's values on their website, but some people do. I want to say a few things about what actually goes into our decision-making process, because I think it's maybe a little bit interesting. We say we hire people for their strengths, and we know that not everyone is going to be able to perceive the exact same candidate's strengths, especially if they're asking about different things over the course of a day. So we have people give their part of the interview a score from 1 to 4. We debrief in person, and we think that a few low scores are actually fine. An interviewer can outright veto someone and explain why, but in practice, I don't know that that's ever happened. But each person that we actually are going to end up hiring and bring on board needs to have a champion. So they need to get at least 1 4, and they need someone who says, I can see this person's strengths, and I'm going to make the case for them to be on the team. This means that the person is going to come in with a support network of people who are brought into their success and have ideas for how to use their strengths as part of what we're going to build together. Another funny thing about our process is that we actually have a no negotiation policy. We really do have strict salary bands. We find that there are often a lot of biases baked into the negotiation process and that it typically benefits people who have more privilege already. So we are pretty strict about this. We make an offer to people based on where they fall in the bands, and if they want to, we can trade a little bit of salary for equity or vice versa, but they can't just go, nope, pay me more money. And one last thing that really matters to me, diversity and inclusion is very important to us as a company, and it's important to me as a person. So how does this process kind of match up to that? It turns out to work out okay. Since we put all these things into practice, our engineering team went from all white men and me to about half women and maybe a third people of color. We tend to get positive results just sort of by dialing back how adversarial the process can be. We also find that having a fairly narrow set of required skills on our job description encourages more folks to not self-select out of the pipeline, which is really important. And just to be clear, we're not talking about changing our standards. We are talking about how to get people who are highly qualified to believe that they will do well in our interview process and actually come in and interview. So just sort of by these are a lot of things that sort of tend to disproportionately work against women and people of color. And so just sort of by tweaking our interview process to dial those things back, the results have actually been pretty good. As an aside, I should say that the best way to get a particular group of people represented in your candidate pool is to have that group represented in your leadership team. We don't do well attracting candidates from every demographic group, but we get great numbers of candidates who are women, who are over 40, who are Asian American, even for roles where Asian Americans are underrepresented, which is leadership and management roles. Folks who are LGBTQ identified, folks who come from non-traditional tech backgrounds, and all this is without doing any recruiting. And you can guess why when you look at our team page. So there's a lesson buried in there that I've seen play out over and over again, which is that if you want to attract more folks from a particular group and make them successful, bringing on the most senior person possible is going to have a bigger impact than bringing on 3 junior people from that group, right? The engineering team was all men when I joined, and I swore up and down that I would never join another all-male engineering team. But I did it because I looked at the leadership team and I said, it's not going to stay this way forever, and I was totally right. So we've also found that having a diverse leadership team boosts our applicant pools from other communities. Like, candidates will look at us and say, maybe they don't have someone from my background, but at least not everyone in the company has the same background, so I can assume maybe there's some degree of tolerance for difference, and maybe that they're looking to become more diverse, and so that's helpful too. There's a lot more work we can do here, and I'm excited to keep working on it in the future. So finally, we talked about all those steps in our process. We've been doing some of these things for probably about 2 years now. I know it sounds, like maybe like it would work on paper. How's it really going? Obviously, one of our values is transparency, so I want to be straight with you about what's not working. It's still not the case that every hire works out. I would say in defense of this process, we have found that we have yet to have a hire that didn't work out because we didn't see them clearly. We had the problem where we didn't see ourselves clearly. We liked the person, we wanted them to join, we saw their strengths, and we failed to be real with ourselves about our own needs as a company and about the level of support we could give them. That always feels bad. 2, this process is quite personal. It used to depend mostly on charity. Now it depends a lot on my time and energy. I can start dropping the ball on some of the more personal steps when I get busy. I really should be cross-training people on my team to help out. And 3, like Google, we still can't assess who is going to be an extraordinary performer. As Charity says, senior engineers tend to skew toward different archetypes. Like, maybe if we really tried, we could assess whether or not someone fits into one specific archetype, but we can't figure out from the space of all possible extraordinary talents which ones they might have. So we accept that, and we just commit to re-leveling people quickly if we get it wrong. So we always will re-level people by the first quarterly review cycle, which tends to be a max of about 3 months in, even if it's not an official review cycle for promotion. So just to sum it up one last time, our big principles are no surprises, realistic code, test in production, the communication is the interview, product in production. I didn't talk as much about production, but we want to understand, make sure people that know how to take the code from end to end. We want to see every candidate at their best, and we want to make sure that we give them a chance to interview us. If you're someone who does better with reading than like the out loud stuff, there's a blog post about this on our website that Charity wrote that goes into a fair amount of detail, so I would definitely check that out. If you walk out of this room and you like, this is already becoming a blur, if there's one thing you take away, I really want you to just remember, no Space Invaders interview processes. You can interview someone by treating them like they are already a valued member of your team. It really does work. All right, thank you.